if attention is a currency of learning and they're fiddling around with their equipment and they're not paying attention, well, now all of a sudden there's no learning happening. So, you can be pushing on, but you're leaving your students behind.
As humans, as adults, there are ways that we can almost give ourselves a sense of empathy, because I think understanding, the challenge, I think is probably a big hurdle to get over.
But we also have to take into account what that change means for the learner as well. And this is why a whole school approach is definitely a lot more effective, because rather than it just being like one single teacher that's trying to change all of these different routines and expectations on their own, instead, like if we've got that whole school approach, all the teachers are doing the same thing consistently, because as I said before, when we come in and save the day, we're actually not helping in the long run.
Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, and anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. And this week, we continue our 4-part mini-series on behaviour with an episode titled Behaviour is Taught, Not Managed. Now, having begun the series by examining why behaviour can feel so challenging, we now turn towards what teachers can deliberately do about it. Now, I'm joined by Brendan Lee, an educator who combines extensive classroom and leadership experience with his current work supporting schools across Australia and New Zealand. Now, I think one of Brendan's greatest strengths is his ability to connect evidence about learning with the practical realities of teaching. Now, and this episode moves the series from diagnosis to action. And the central argument is not that teachers should become harsher or more controlling. It's that we cannot reasonably expect pupils to demonstrate behaviours that we have never properly taught them. Now, as you know, all 4 episodes in the mini-series are already available to supporters. You can listen to the complete series right now by subscribing to Tier 3 at kofi.com/Tadape. And remember, tickets for Tadape Edinburgh are also now on sale, with all details available through the usual Tadape channels and on Eventbrite. Link in description. So, without further ado, let's spend some time thinking deeply about primary education. So, Brendan, it's great to see you again. How are you?
Yeah, great, Kieran. Always love catching up with you for a chat.
Yeah, definitely. Always lots of fun. I mean, I was checking. April 23, I think we last spoke on air. What have you been up to in the meantime?
Oh, geez, 20. That seems like a long time ago now. I probably have moved more into consultancy now, whereas probably when we last spoke, I was probably still in the classroom, and so I guess just trying to further my impact, and the way that I've seen that is by firstly stepping out of the classroom, then stepping out of a school, so that now I can kind of work with schools and systems around the country and New Zealand. Yeah, actually, when you sent me an email, I was actually in New Zealand doing a bit of able to mix a bit of work and pleasure at the time. So really enjoyable. This sort of experience allows you to see, I guess, gain a bit more of a wider perspective of how things are working or not working, and I find that really interesting, and constantly forces me to refine my own practice in not just like what I do in the classroom, but actually how I deliver professional learning and support that implementation side of things as well. So really looking forward to having this chat, and this is one of the things that I kind of behavior is one of those things that I wasn't naturally good at, and it was only as I started to learn more about effective teaching and learning that I realized, look, this is like the prerequisite almost to everything else that we're talking about when it comes to curriculum and instruction. I'll often say, like, if you haven't got calm, focused classrooms, don't worry about the next part.
First episode in this sort of mini series, me and Charles Bankwith were talking about how it took us years to get to know it, but it is so important, because like we talked about the science of mathematics when we last met, and you don't get anywhere near that, do you? So it's amazing to see that you're already thinking on those lines, and actually the inspiration for this came from an Australian or our study was done in Australia, I think it was the challenges of challenging behaviour, and where they'd ask teachers about their experiences of them of sort of classrooms and and how they thought things were going. So maybe we'll see there's a lot of parallels there.
If you talk to any teacher that is struggling in their role and what they're doing, most of the time it's going to come back to the fact that they're just having issues with behaviour, and it can, if you're having to constantly get on top of that day in, day out, it's really draining and it's not enjoyable for anyone.
We're almost starting to touch on it. Why is behaviour for learning so important?
Yeah, well, if we just look at how learning happens, right, and I think it's Peps McRae. I kind of I give him credit for this quote, but attention is the currency of learning, and so if we just focus on that for a moment, right, then if we're not able to pay attention to the main thing, then learning's not going to happen. And so, why is it so important? Because if our students aren't paying attention, it doesn't matter how good you think the lesson's going as a teacher. You might feel like it's going really well, and you're able to kind of get through the lesson and the content, and then you turn around and you look at the students and no one's paying attention. In that sort of scenario, you might have taught it, but have they learnt it? Most probably not. And so that's why, behaviour is just so important for learning to happen, because while we can create the conditions, for learning to happen, it still requires the students, the learners, the individuals to actually be motivated enough to pay attention. And learning is hard, right? So it requires that learner to actually make an effort to focus on the main thing, like the easy option. And, as I often talk about how as human beings, we're hardwired to be lazy thinkers. So we would, that's why like our devices are so addictive, right? Because it's so much easier to just go mindlessly scrolling through our phone rather than actually having to think really hard about something new, and essentially, like as teachers, we're constantly trying to upgrade, our students' learning mental models, their schemas. And when we're trying to do that, that requires them to change how they currently think. And so that's hard. That's, that requires them, they're right back at that acquisition stage of learning, that novice stage. And so when they're there, if we don't help them and teach them how to behave and how to pay attention and give them those metacognitive skills, they don't just come out of nowhere. Like, I think this is, we'll probably touch on this a bit later on as well, but because as experts, we often suffer from that curse of knowledge. And so we can forget how hard it is to learn things. And so that's why we can often be sucked into, or, lured into the romantic approach to learning, and just be like, oh, we're just going to give them some activities, and we're going to hopefully they'll be able to work it out for themselves and figure some things out, and that sounds really great. But if we just kind of I guess allow them to choose, and I guess this also comes back to when we have that approach for really pushing for student autonomy. So when we push for student autonomy before they've actually got expertise in what they're doing, then they will often make the wrong choices, or they'll choose to take that easy option rather than the hard option, which is often where the learning will actually happen.
There's so much going on there, and so much as a teacher we need to be aware of. Do you think that the more aware of that you became, the more you realized, or the higher expectations of behavior became in your classroom? Was there almost like, like a, I don't want to say causal relationship, but was there any sort of relationship between your disposition in the class and your awareness of the science of learning, so to speak?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because it's really just about you talk about awareness, and so it's having that awareness of the need for everyone to be paying attention. Yeah, and while we can't be 100% certain when students are paying attention or not, because we can't get inside their heads, but we can go off some, like, we can be pretty confident with like some certain behaviors And when I say behavior in this instance, it's like behavior is anything that we do, right? It's not often when we talk about behavior, we just assume that we're talking negatively, but really behavior is anything that we do. And so there are some observational look fors that we can be looking for as a teacher that are going to give us a pretty good indication that students are paying attention to the main thing. And so I'll often, pause what I'm doing or really make it quite clear in what direction I want my students to be looking at and what they're doing in terms of their hands and I don't want anything in your hands right now, nothing in your hands. I just need your full attention on the main thing, looking up here. And once we've got that, then we can start to be a bit more confident that, all right, now I can start to move on to that next thing. What we're talking about now in terms of behavior, it directly links up to the curriculum as well, because if I'm trying to teach my curriculum and I'm not pitching it right, so I'm trying to teach them one thing and they're not quite there yet, they haven't got the prerequisite knowledge, essentially it's like I'm speaking another language to them, so they don't understand what I'm saying. As soon as I start to explain things in a way that they don't understand, they're going to start to switch off again. And so this is why, when Rosenstein talks about sequencing concepts in small steps, this is also why it's important. So it's directly linked, what we're doing academically and how we set up our behaviors and our routines and expectations, directly linked. So coming back to your point of, as I learned more about the science of learning, how did that impact on my practice? Well, this is how, because you're constantly problem solving. You're constantly thinking about what percentage of my students are thinking about the main thing. Like, that's kind of what is always going on in my head. Anytime I'm in front of a group of students, it's like, all right, are they thinking about the main thing right now? And if so, how many of them are thinking about the main thing? If they're not thinking about the main thing, what are they thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, am I right in thinking there was a video you shared online of your teaching? That wasn't
Yes.
it wasn't too long ago. Yeah, I mean, is that still available for people to have a look at? Because my memory is of your non-verbal communication was just as powerful as your verbal communication, and those expectations were really clear to see within the sequence. Where can people check that out if they want to see that?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. I can share the link with you, and that way it can get out to listeners. But yeah, and that's really why I did want to do that, was because there's so much in actually seeing things in action. I think you would get this as well as someone who provides professional learning, is that it's really about bridging that abstract to concrete gap. And we talk about that in maths, right? But it applies to professional learning as well. Is if we just talk about the research and this is what you need to do, that can be great. It can feel nice and it can help build up our knowledge base. But often teachers will leave those sorts of sessions still with questions in their mind around, well, what does that actually look like in the classroom? So yeah, I definitely find that sort of thing really powerful. And I think when we're talking about the expectations aspect to it and following up, I often refer to like the ABCs of behavior. So for those of you that have maybe looked into things like functional behavior, you might be familiar with the ABCs. So the ABCs are antecedent, behavior, and consequence. And I'm gonna go off on a slight tangent here, Kieran, and just tell a bit of a story just to help people understand how they can use the ABCs. And when I learnt about this stuff, it kind of transformed my way of thinking, not just in terms of the classroom, but actually in life. I just look at life through this lens of the ABCs, and I'll explain it now. So, picture this scenario. We're at a park, the local sporting ground, and Kieran, you and I were just talking about the football at the moment. So, pretend that you're at the local sporting ground. Maybe you've taken your child, your son or daughter, niece or nephew. You're out to the local sporting ground, and the Mr. Whippy van rocks up, the ice cream. Do you guys have Mr. Whippy over there? All right, so you'll be familiar with the scenario, right? So you're at the field, Mr. Whippy van rocks up, kids just start running over, and then naturally, your child asks you, "Can I have an ice cream?" And because we are really responsible parents, we'll say no, right? And we say no, but of course, our child will push it a bit, and they might say, "Oh, why? Everyone else is getting an ice cream. It's really hot." They'll be really persuasive with their arguments. And depending on their age, or maybe not even depending on their age, you might get to this point where they start making quite a big deal, quite a big scene. They might be crying. That crying might turn into a tantrum. And if we're at our local sporting ground, being teachers, there's a very good chance that there are going to be some families around who know you, right? And so they're looking at you and they're like, this guy, he's a terrible parent. And so you give in, right? You give in and you say, oh, all right, fine, you can have the ice cream. You go over. And so what have you now set up? You've now set up the expectation that when the Misty Whippy van comes, if your child, asks for it and then doesn't get it, if they keep pushing and pushing and pushing, they're going to get to this point where they'll actually get what they want. And so we have now created the expectation that if I have something that I want, I can cry and scream and shout, and that's what's going to give me that. And so, what's happening here? So in this instance, the antecedent is the Mr. Whippy van coming, right? So that's what comes before the behaviour. So the behaviour is then asking for the ice cream, and then crying and chucking the tantrum. So that's the behaviour that has then led to the consequence. So often when we speak about consequences, we think of them as being like negative things, but consequences is just what happens after the behaviour. And so the consequence was then, I gave in and I bought the ice cream. And so now in the future, next time that antecedent pops up again of the ice cream truck, we can get that repeat behaviour leading to that consequence. It's a lot harder to break once it's been set. So in the classroom, what this can look like is, and like maths is such a typical subject for this to happen in, where a student has been experiencing repeated failure in the classroom. So they might now be in year 4 or year 5, and so if you think about that student's learning journey throughout their schooling life, right, they have just been experiencing failure day in, day out. And so the antecedent in this instance becomes the subject, right, maths, okay? And so their behaviour, right, in the past, maybe they've actually had a go and they've tried to do their best, but then that consequence has been failure, right? And so when they get that failure, then they're likely to then, we don't like to experience failure. And so we're thinking, well, what can I do to get out of this? And so eventually we get to this point where that child will be displaying like negative behavior of some sort, right? So it might be disengaged learning behavior, talking to their friend, throwing something across the classroom, being the class clown. And that will lead to, the teacher going through their kind of behavior procedure. And usually that will result in that child being either sent out of the classroom or sent to a different area. But essentially they will miss out on the learning. And we see that they're getting this, sending them out of the classroom as a negative, but the child in that instance actually sees that potentially as a positive. We've inadvertently given them what they want by sending them out of the classroom. So now in the future, when they repeat that, when they repeat that, they've got that maths subject again, they're going to repeat that behaviour so that they can then get sent out of the classroom, which is what they actually want. So yeah, the reason why it's important to kind of have this understanding is because if we keep thinking about what the antecedent is, then we can actually start to get in front of this negative behavior, right? And we can break that negative cycle. So instead, what we want is, rather than setting our students up for failure by getting them to do things that they're not ready to do, that they're unable to do, they haven't got the skills and knowledge to do, we actually teach it to them first. Okay, so now the antecedent is actually the teacher is modeling to them, showing the students what they need to know. Then the behavior is the students are going to practice, like they've got that opportunity to practice that one small thing that the teacher's asking them to do. The consequence then becomes behaviour-specific praise. So we then praise them, we give them positive feedback, which feels good, okay, which now means we're in this positive loop where the students experience success, which feels a lot better than that failure. And so they're more likely to stay engaged for that next thing that we're going to ask them to do. And so, yeah, this is, again, coming back to that link between behaviour and the curriculum. This is just why it's so important to kind of understand where your students are at, what they need to know next, and then we can get into this positive learning cycle.
Attention is the currency of learning, and that principle should shape your mathematics curriculum just as much as it shapes behaviour. Every time pupils wrestle with unclear instructions, distracting contexts, or a task that they have not been prepared to tackle, their attention is being spent on the wrong thing. And every time teachers have to stitch together tomorrow's sequence from 5 different websites, so is theirs. Now, the story of mathematics curriculum resources protect that attention. New ideas are broken into manageable steps, connected to what pupils already know, and supported through carefully chosen representations, practice, retrieval, and assessment. The point is not to make mathematics easier, it's to make the hard thinking possible. If you want more of every maths lesson spent actually thinking mathematically, get in touch today through the link in the show notes or by emailing us at support@alta-education.com. You can see how easily people get to all behaviours communication, but actually the way you're describing there with the antecedents, that's so much more helpful for teachers, isn't it? Because you can identify that cause and solution sort of relationship. I mean, are there any routines that you think are most important to establish in the classroom, or is it very much based on the cohort you've got?
The more that I've done this, the more that I've thought about it, and I'm pretty sure this is the Archerism, from Anita Archer. It's like assume nothing and teach everything. And so, when it comes to the most important routines, well, like anything that can be a routine is important. But I would generally start from the start of the lesson, right? Again, coming back to your ABCs, if we can start on the front foot, it's a lot easier to kind of get the ball rolling, and then we can build some momentum. So right from the start, it's like, how do you enter the classroom? and it seems like such a simple thing, but if you've got no sort of structure, no sort of expectations or routines around how students enter the classroom, then often what we'll see is, of course, you're going to have a percentage of the students who they've naturally been able to pick up over time, like the positive learning behavior of just being able to enter that classroom respectfully. But then you're also going to have a few kids that they just come in yahooing, right? And it's just all fun and games for them. Now if you think about the ABCs again, and if we haven't come in with that antecedent of teaching them how to behave and teaching them what our expectations are, often what will happen is we won't have a shared understanding over what the correct way is to enter the classroom. So this child thinks it's okay. They think it's okay to enter the classroom, running in and sitting wherever they want, and pushing and shoving their mate as they do that. They think that's okay, and maybe previous teachers have been okay with that. They've allowed that to happen. And so then this, if it's my class and I haven't told them, but then I'm naturally going to get upset. Like, why are you running in the classroom? That's often what you'll hear is, oh, why have you entered like that? Why are you making so much noise? Well, if you haven't actually told them that you need to enter the classroom silently, and you need to enter that classroom walking, you need to be safe as you're doing that. Like, if you haven't told them that, you can't expect them to know that, because at home, previous teachers, maybe that was allowed and it was okay. So they have now, they've got this mental model of when I enter a room, I can do this. And so this is just why it's so important to actually start with assume nothing, teach everything, teach them what the expectations are. And then you teach them exactly the same way as you would teach anything academically, right? Where you're going to start with that modeling. Okay, you're going to explain how to do it. For me, I'll just stick on like this entry routine. I like a silent entry because you can measure silence. If you say something like quiet, well, my quiet might be different to your quiet, might be different to the student's quiet. 30 quiet students is not quiet anymore. And so, that's why I just find silent is a lot easier to measure. And then, generally I'll keep it to like 3 things, so it'll be like, all right, in a moment when I say go, we're going to enter the classroom silently. When you do that, that means you're not making any noise. You're going to enter without touching anyone. You're going to enter and you're going to sit straight into your allocated seat. Well, again, that's another thing that I would set up is a seating plan. And then you check for understanding, so it's like, all right, what's the first thing that we have to do? And that might be cold calling. It might be cold responses. What's the second thing that we're going to do? What's the third thing that we're going to do? Great. I'm now just going to, I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm now going to just get this, the first 4 people. Let's just see if they can do that first, and I'll kind of drip feed them in, and we'll all be watching. First 4, off they go. Great. Were they able to do the first thing? Were they silent? Were they safe? Did they sit down where they were meant to sit down? Awesome. All right. Next people go. And then we're slowly speeding that up. And then making sure that you're kind of standing in that halfway point of the doorway so you can see both in and outside. And then, if you need to, right, you need to address anything that goes wrong straight away. But if you actually use, and I briefly mentioned it before, behaviour-specific praise, if you use that right from the start, then all of a sudden, everyone else is like, oh, I want to be praised. I want Mr. Lee to highlight me. So I'll be like, oh, I love the way that Kieran and Tom and Sarah, they've entered the classroom without speaking. They're not touching anyone, and they've just sat straight down in their seat. Let's see if the next group can do that. So we want to start on the positive, because again, this is where it can go wrong quite quickly. When you just see a couple of kids talking at the back, and you're like, who's talking? Who's talking up there? Right? Like, no one's going to put their hand up. Oh, yeah, Mr. Lee, that was me. Sorry, I was talking. I've never seen that happen. Right? They all just stay silent, right? And then gradually, they'll be like, oh, we got away with that. Okay, and so then you got a couple more people talking, and now the next thing, before you know it, you've got half the class talking, and then you blow your top, and you're like, what did I say? I said no talking. Everyone back outside, and it's such a common scenario, one I've definitely been guilty of early in my career, right? And then so you back outside. Next thing you know, you've now spent 10, 15 minutes doing this over and over again, and it ends up becoming a joke, right? The joke's on you, because the kids are like, oh, this is great. We don't have to do any learning today. Let's just keep doing this. And so, really hard to come back. Whereas if we start on a positive, then now all of a sudden, everyone wants to hear that positive praise. And for those that don't, then it might, and this really comes back to knowing your students. Like some of the kids, especially as they get older, it might just mean like a quick head nod, thumbs up, just that acknowledgement, but they don't necessarily need that public praise. And then the last thing I'll say on this is that really, what is hard about the behaviour-specific praise is I think that we naturally will go for the negatives. I think it's like a safety mechanism. And so if you don't do a lot of behaviour-specific praise, and they talk about a ratio of 4-to-1, so 4 positive praise statements to 1 negative statement. And most teachers struggle with that. I know that's one that I've had to deliberately practice, because we will naturally just go for the negative things because we're trying to keep everyone safe. But like I said before, it's a positive stuff which can really transform your classroom.
It was described to me as like a bank balance with your class, and you want to keep yourself on the black is the good one, isn't it? And if you're in the red, then you're in sort of choppy waters. And so so what you're describing there, I'm imagining, you want to keep yourself as far away from that line as possible. I mean, one of the things I often think about, when I think back to my own career, I didn't reinforce when things slipped, and so we would have massive slippage over maybe 2 terms. How often do you go back to your routines? Because I think as teachers, it's almost our instinct to try and get through it as quickly as possible, whereas you're describing a very deliberate, purposeful part of your school day and ultimately the school year.
Yeah, and again, this is something which I've had to, as a school leader, had to be really deliberate with. And we kind of created like a behaviour curriculum, so similar to the things that Tom Bennett will talk about. But like if you look at that word curriculum, right, it's like what we teach and how we sequence it, and so that's really what it comes down to, is just looking at what you're talking about before, the main routine. So what are all the routines and expectations that we want to have consistent across the school? And once you work that out, then you can start to think about, well, how will we kind of space this out in how we teach it over time, but not just teach it in that here and the now, but then how are we going to follow that up as well? Because again, if you look at behavior the same way as we look at academic learning, then you start to understand that when students slip up, okay, they're just making mistakes, right? And like in the classroom, when we're trying to teach maths or we're trying to teach English, when students make mistakes, we don't get them in trouble. We don't make them stay back at lunchtime or recess because they've made a mistake. And so the same needs to apply when it comes to routines and expectations. Like, they're naturally going to forget things. Like, we know that from what we know about our working memory and the forgetting curve. And so if I've just introduced this new routine once, okay, and if you go like for the specialist teachers, the secondary teachers, you might then not see that class again for another week. And if that's the case, like we can definitely guarantee that they're going to forget the majority of what they've learned over 7 days. And so we're going to have to go over it again. And so that might require you to do a bit of retrieval practice in your questioning and your prompting as to what those expectations were around how we enter that classroom and what they need to do. And that's okay. And I guarantee you, like, if you like just think about these routines and expectations the same way as you think about learning in our academic subjects, you'll start to better understand the fact that we've actually got to dedicate time to this. It's like those teachers who were really reluctant to do regular retrieval practice. Well, if you don't do that, they're just going to forget things anyway. Right. And so the same thing applies here. You don't put the time into building those routines to a level of fluency, then they're just going to make more mistakes further along the line. And we're going to get to this point in the year, that midway point of the year, where the teacher's just feeling really frustrated because we're like, well, I taught you this at the start of the year. Why do I have to go over this again? Well, you've got to go over it again because they've just forgotten it, or they've just made a mistake, or, because you've taught them so many other things between now and the start of the year, they have lost focus of it. And so you've just got to go over it. And that's okay, right? But it's more a matter of the teacher not just pushing on. Again, I've definitely fallen into that trap of you're feeling that pressure of, I've got so much content to get through. I don't want to have to waste more time in teaching a routine that I've already taught. But it's going to save you time in the long run because, like we've spoken about that entry routine, but it might also be routines for learning, where it's what your expectations are for how they're using their mini whiteboards. And so maybe you're starting to see a bit of slippage in they're fiddling around with their equipment when you're trying to teach, and you try to keep pushing on. But coming back to that first point of, well, if attention is a currency of learning and they're fiddling around with their equipment and they're not paying attention, well, now all of a sudden there's no learning happening. So, you can be pushing on, but you're leaving your students behind.
What Brendan is describing is not one-off intervention. Pupils learn routines through carefully chosen practice, timely feedback, and repeated opportunities to get them right. And that's the thinking behind ASIL Pro. ASIL Pro works out what each pupil is ready to rehearse and gives them practice that responds to what they know, rather than simply serving everybody the next page or the next objective. And the platform is independent of any particular curriculum because we've already done the difficult work of connecting its mathematical progression with the standards across the UK and Ireland, Australia, and the United States of America. Now, schools can keep their curriculum. ASIL Pro makes the rehearsal more precise. Now, you can explore it now in a number of different languages at asil.pro. That's SEEL.PRO. If you ever reach that point, it's like that point of frustration. You're almost at the point of no return. You're halfway through the school year. I mean, what point? Because it's winter now for you guys in the Southern Hemisphere. So I reckon most teachers in Australia and New Zealand are halfway through their school year. There could be teachers who hypothetically are feeling, actually, I didn't put these things in place, or I wasn't aware that this was a way we could approach things. Because, in my first year, I had no idea that this is a thing. Is your approach to salvaging that any different from your approach to establishing in the first place? Or what might you recommend for teachers who are feeling that frustration?
Yeah, look, it's never too late. I think it's definitely easier to do at the start of the year. because the other way to look at behavior, right, is it's also like habits that we're building up over time. So not just habits for the teacher, but also habits for the student. So we know, from all the research on habits, and have you read Atomic Habits from James Clear? And yeah. So like we know from the research on habits, right, is that they're really hard to break, really hard to create new habits. I know from my previous life as a personal trainer, right, like that was really all I was dealing with was trying to help people create new habits. And so for our students, they have built up these habits over the last 6 months or longer, of how they approach learning at school. And so, if you're asking them to really like change the way that they respond in class, they're used to putting their hands up all the time, and now you're asking for you're telling them, I'm going to be calling on non-volunteers, right? That's a really hard habit to break. And so we've actually got to support them in that as well. So talk about like the change from a teaching perspective for the teacher, but we also have to take into account what that change means for the learner as well. And this is why like a whole school approach is definitely a lot more effective, because rather than it just being like one single teacher that's trying to change all of these different routines and expectations on their own, instead, like if we've got that whole school approach, all the teachers are doing the same thing consistently. And so it just means that like it doesn't matter if it's me, if it's you, if it's the teacher next door, or doing the same routines. And so as the students move through the grades, as they go from class to class, we've got those same expectations, and the teacher doesn't like, they can still set the expectations, because the students are always going to test a new teacher out, but it means that we don't have to spend as much time reteaching everything, because the students will quickly figure out, oh, it's the same expectations and routines, doesn't matter what classroom I go to. So we can definitely get on top of it mid-year, but it just requires, like at the start of the year, it requires you to actually dedicate time, so block out time as you're planning your lessons, block out time, whether it's the first 15 minutes of that lesson, and on the different routines, and once you kind of space that out over time, it just means that you're going to get back time in the long run, because otherwise what happens is we lose all this time because we're getting so frustrated at the students for displaying that negative learning behavior, and so learning's not happening anyway. And so you can try to push on, but learning's not going to happen.
So for the last 12 months, I've given up smoking, replaced smoking with food, and then tried to give up food as well. So I think my weight is now, and my exercise is going up, my weight's going down, and I haven't smoked in over 12 months. But whenever you try to change a habit like that, it is all consuming. And I'm sure obviously habits in the classroom, maybe less, there are no addictive substances in play, but it's the challenge is real. So I can see, so I think as humans, as adults, there are ways that we can almost give ourselves a sense of empathy, because I think understanding, the challenge, I think is probably a big hurdle to get over. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to recommend that everyone starts smoking and then gives it up, but there are other things, like James Clear talks about chaining habits together and things like that. You talk about, I think it makes a whole lot of sense, I think.
Yeah, look, thank you for sharing that, and well done on being able to break that habit and pick up some more positive ones instead. And yeah, it's really hard, and like I think this is also where like one thing as teachers that we can take advantage of are social norms. Yeah, so like because we are working with groups of students, one thing that can make it easier for students to pick up these new habits is by getting the majority on board with doing the right thing. And so once we've got that majority, or the leaders doing the right thing, then others will start to follow. So it just becomes a lot easier. Whereas when you're trying to break a individual habit like smoking, you're on your own, right? Like you've got to do that, and it's a constant battle. It's a 24/7 battle that you're going through, and so this is where the school scenario it can work for us when we take advantage of those social norms.
Almost permeating the whole conversation we've had is the leaders are on the periphery. How important are leaders, and almost are we, as the least experienced teachers in school, are we on hiding to nothing if we don't have the support of our leaders, or is it possible to operate efficiently? What do you think?
It's a lot more effective when you have leaders on board supporting it, leading it. What can happen in a lot of schools is that teachers look at leaders to save the day. So I've got a challenging student, and so rather than me dealing with that challenging student, I look to leadership to come in and take that student away, or they deal with the consequence, right? In this instance, like that negative consequence. And so, yeah, I've also worked in schools where they've sort of had that culture. And so what that does, like unintentionally, it actually takes away a lot of the control, the power, the respect of the teacher when they do that, when in actual fact, the teacher, they need to be the one who really kind of deals with those students rather than offloading the problem. So definitely we want the support of leadership, but what the support of leadership should be is actually in upskilling the staff, firstly, in like how to teach routines, how to pick up that habit of using behaviour-specific praise. Like they're the things that leadership can be doing, creating that behaviour curriculum, leading that implementation, supporting teachers in how that actually looks and how it's implemented, modelling all of that stuff. Less so, saving the day, because as I said before, when we come in and save the day, we're actually not helping in the long run. Like that teacher, they need to do that, because then the student understands that in the future, right, this teacher, they run the room, that's really what is needed, is that teacher to have control of it, because we're going to get to this point where the teacher's not able to call on the leadership all the time. And again, I've been in that sort of scenario where, you've got teachers calling on for help way too often. And then what ends up happening is you go to the principal's office and there's like this lineup of students, that goes outside the door, and that poor principal has no time to do any of their work. They're now staying back until midnight to actually get their their duties, perform their role properly. And so it's not really helping anyone at all when that sort of thing happens. There can be moments when maybe you do need a bit of help. Maybe you do need that child just to leave the room for a bit, because everyone just needs a bit of space. But in that instance, when that child returns, when that student returns, it should still be that classroom teacher that is talking to them and having that kind of restorative conversation around what needs to happen next, and why that was the wrong thing to do, and how can I help you in what needs to happen in the future. But again, like often, when we start to understand the ABCs again, right, what the teacher will start to do and should start to do is actually reflect back on, well, how could I have prevented this from happening? Because often there would have been something. The reason why things go wrong in a classroom usually comes back to, what did the teacher do beforehand to either lead this negative behavior to be occurring, or because we might have presented our learning and it's too difficult for the students, we haven't supported them, and so now we're seeing this behavior. Or it might have been, I actually didn't teach them what my expectations were, what the routines were. I haven't taught them how to do that. And so then I've now become upset at this child. They've now come back at me because we haven't got a shared understanding over what that should actually look like. And so often it will come, it will come back to what the teacher could have been doing instead, to actually support that child in being successful in the classroom. And this can be a really hard one to take for teachers. And so if they haven't got this understanding around how learning happens and how, as a teacher, like we should be teaching our students like everything that they need to be able to do. And if we're not doing that, we can't assume that they know how to do things. And it doesn't matter how old they are. It doesn't matter if someone else has taught them how to do it. The responsibility, in my eyes, still falls back on us, the teacher. We need to be the person responsible for the things that happen in our classroom, even when they go wrong.
I think what's really clear is that it takes a lot of deliberate thought on all levels of school life. And like when we first go into the classroom, typically, we've obviously done a bit of training, but we're normally, I think, basing our behavior management on the teachers we had. And that's
Yes.
not necessarily a good model, is it? So maybe earlier we need to be aware of this thought that needs to go into this, and having those scaffolds in place from others, because I think that would make a massive difference. And then maybe it doesn't have to be a rite of passage that the first term or two terms that you teach are an absolute disaster, certainly in my experience.
No, yeah, definitely. And like relationships are still important, right? But relationships are also built through effective teaching. Like I know for me, right, a lot of the teachers that I respected the most or I enjoyed having the most were actually also the strictest ones, or the ones that had the best classroom management skills, right? They're the ones that students like really do respect. And so we can build those relationships through how we teach them, but also like when we're delivering that behavior specific praise, like I've got all these routines, all these expectations, but the students still feel really nice about it because I'm just hammering them with praise throughout the whole lesson. And because the way that I teach is that anything I ask my students to do, I'm going to have taught them how to have done that beforehand. That means that I'm just constantly, giving them positive feedback, because it's just, here, this is what I want you to be able to do. Right, have a go at doing that. I'm now going to check it. Great, we're on track. Now let's try the next thing. And when we teach in this sort of manner, it's just like a really kind of positive environment. And so often, like explicit instruction can get like this negative sort of connotation towards it, because sometimes it can be seen as being like really strict, really like teacher directed. And yeah, it is teacher directed, but it doesn't mean that there's no warmth in it. I think that's important, for listeners to understand, is that your personality should still be seen, and it should still be felt when you're teaching. It doesn't matter whether you're teaching routines, expectations, rules, quadratic equations, simple sentences. Like, it doesn't matter what you're teaching. You should still be able to, like, your personality should still be able to shine through that. But it's just that we can use the evidence to inform us like how to do that more effectively, so that it actually sticks with our students as well. And so they're learning things. We're then backing that up with positive praise, that feedback. We're now in this positive cycle. Students are more motivated to learn because they're feeling good about what they're doing. And now we can try the next thing. And yeah, the more that we can kind of think about our classroom in that sort of sense, and the fact that, this is your room, you need to, know what you're teaching, know what success looks like, and assume nothing and teach everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the mantra, isn't it? I mean, I think you can be more yourself when everyone knows where the line is, and the expectations of the classroom are really well established. Then you have the freedom to be yourself in the classroom, because it's safe for both you as the teacher and for them as pupils. And like you say, the relationships build so much more, and more so. So I think any almost like dichotomous thinking about explicit instruction hopefully is on the way out. There's been, but I think like things like SLANT, people use different acronyms because SLANT has had such bad press, but actually when you see teachers utilizing it effectively, it is fantastic to see. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. And like really things like SLANT, everyone looks so robotic when they're doing it, or it looks like, we're in some sort of like military school where they've got to kind of do exactly what we're saying, otherwise they're going to get in trouble. But it's not actually that, right? We want them to use SLANT because it just means that they're more likely to be paying attention to the main thing. The more that teachers can start to understand the reasons behind what we do, and I'm seeing this happen a lot, where we have like these techniques that are being like learned by teachers in isolation without that understanding behind the why that they're doing it. And so they just get things muddled up, and they don't use it at the right time, or they use it in the wrong way. And so, yeah, we see, like these lethal mutations happening. And it's just because when they were taught that technique, they weren't necessarily taught the actual reasons why we use that.
I mean, it's been fascinating talking to you. I think a really lovely compliment to the episodes in this series. And I think really actionable, practical advice for teachers. So all I said to do is say thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, all good. Really enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.